Spring 1866. Mississippi. The war was over. But peace, if it had truly come, hadn't reached Ethan Cole. He rode alone through the desolate countryside, the skeletal remains of homes and scorched fields stretching in every direction. The blue sky overhead was deceptive, so bright and full of life, while everything below it still reeked of death and ash. Trees, once full and proud, now stood crooked and charred, like broken soldiers who refused to fall. Ethan pulled his worn coat tighter as the wind brushed past him. Not for warmth, it was spring and the breeze was mild, but out of habit, a soldier's habit, one of many he couldn't quite shake. His horse trotted slowly, hooves crunching over dry grass and patches of broken glass. Once this had been a thriving road, families, wagons, laughter. Now only silence remained. A silence Ethan had grown too familiar with. He had fought bravely, they said. He'd led men, saved lives, done his duty. But what did bravery mean when all it left behind was emptiness? The medals tucked away in his satchel felt like mockery, cold, lifeless tokens for a price he hadn't agreed to pay. The land was scarred, but not half as much as the people who survived. When Ethan finally reached his family's homestead, he didn't dismount right away. He sat there, still as a statue, his heart pounding in a rhythm he hadn't noticed before. In his mind, he saw it as it once was. His father chopping wood by the porch, his mother tending the garden, his little sister chasing chickens through the tall grass. But memory is cruel when matched against reality. The house had collapsed, roof sunken in, front door off its hinges. The fields, once golden with corn, were choked with weeds. The barn leaned to one side like it had given up trying to stand tall. A crow squawked in the distance, perched on the skeletal frame of the chimney. Ethan finally dismounted, his boots landing heavily on the dirt. He approached the ruins, each step slower than the last. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of fresh grass and blooming dogwoods. Spring was trying. Nature was trying to reclaim what war had stolen. But to Ethan, the scent only masked the gunpowder that still lingered in his soul. He stepped into what used to be the living room. The hearth was filled with crumbled brick. A bent horseshoe lay by the door, half buried in dust. He knelt to pick it up, brushing off the dirt. It was the same one his father had nailed above the door for luck. It hadn't worked. Ethan stood in silence for a long time. No tears came. He'd lost the ability somewhere between Antietam and Gettysburg. The grief was there, but it had calcified into something heavier, something that lived in his bones now. He didn't sleep that night. He built a small fire near the ruins, sat with his back against a fallen beam, and stared at the flames. They flickered and hissed, dancing like ghosts. The war had taken so much, his family, his friends, his faith, and now it was demanding something more, that he keep going. But where? The next morning, Ethan packed what little he had and turned his horse west. Not toward any particular destination, just away from the graves, the ghosts, the hollow promises of a united country. Maybe, just maybe, somewhere out there, he could find peace. Or at least a reason to keep breathing. As he rode away, he didn't look back. The homestead vanished behind a cluster of trees, swallowed by vines and silence. The past was ashes, and the wind, gentle, indifferent, carried them eastward as Ethan headed west. The second night on the trail was colder than the first. Ethan set up camp just beyond the tree line, where the forest opened into a patch of meadow. The grass there grew tall and unbothered, swaying in the evening breeze like waves in a forgotten ocean. He unsaddled his horse slowly, careful not to spook it. The animal was tired but steady, its breath visible in the crisp air. A small fire crackled beside a ring of stones. Ethan sat cross-legged, chewing a piece of dried meat, eyes fixed on the flames. The sky above was beginning to darken, streaks of purple and rose fading into deep indigo. He found comfort in the rhythm of the night sounds, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the distant hoot of an owl. It was quiet, almost peaceful. But peace, like everything else out here, was fragile. A low growl shattered the stillness. Ethan froze, every muscle in his body going tense. His hand slid slowly to the rifle resting beside him. The fire cast flickering shadows across the clearing, but beyond its reach, the forest loomed dark and unreadable. Then he saw them, two golden eyes glowing from the tree line. The wolf stepped forward, slow and deliberate. It was lean, its ribs faintly visible under a shaggy coat. Its ears were flat, lips curled in a silent snarl. It didn't seem afraid of the fire, or of Ethan. His horse whinnied, stomping nervously. Ethan murmured under his breath, "Easy, boy," keeping his voice low and steady. He rose carefully to his feet, the rifle now in his hands. But he didn't raise it yet. He knew better than to make the first move. "Go on," he said softly, eyes locked on the animal. "There's nothing here for you." The wolf paused, head low, tail still. Ethan took a step forward, raising the rifle just slightly. Not enough to aim, just enough to warn. The fire crackled louder as if protesting the tension. Then, with a sudden shift, Ethan fired a single shot into the dirt. The sound cracked through the night like a whip. The wolf jerked back, snarling, then turned and loped into the shadows, swallowed by the trees. Ethan lowered the rifle. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper. A jolt of adrenaline, maybe, or the memory of too many nights where shots like that meant life or death. He exhaled slowly, then turned to calm his horse, stroking its neck. "We're all right," he whispered. "Just a little visit." Still, he didn't sleep much that night. Every snap of a twig, every shifting breeze kept him half awake, eyes flickering toward the trees. He fed the fire more wood than usual, letting it burn higher than it needed to. The forest was vast and indifferent, and Ethan knew that danger wore many faces out here. As dawn broke, the mist curled low across the meadow. Birds began to call from the canopy, and the chill began to lift. Ethan brewed a bit of weak coffee over the remaining coals, staring into the steam like it might offer answers. He had made it through another night, but the wilderness had reminded him of one simple truth. Out here, you didn't get second chances. Not often. He saddled his horse, repacked his meager supplies, and looked west, toward the mountains he hadn't seen yet, and the life he hadn't lived yet. And then he rode on. 3 days west of the Mississippi line, the forest grew denser. The trees pressed close, their canopies thick and heavy, letting in only scattered shafts of golden light. The path had thinned to a mere suggestion beneath Ethan's horse. Fatigue had crept into his limbs, and he hadn't eaten much more than hardtack and dried apples in the last 24 hours. Still, he pushed on. Late that afternoon, just as the sun began its slow descent, his horse stumbled. It happened fast. A jolt, a sharp cry. Ethan lurched forward in the saddle, lost his grip, and hit the ground hard. Pain shot through his leg as he landed in the underbrush with a heavy thud. He cursed, teeth clenched, and tried to stand, but his ankle screamed in protest. The pain radiated up to his knee, hot and sharp. Gritting his teeth, he dragged himself to a nearby tree and leaned back against the bark, breathing hard. His horse limped a few feet and stopped. The animal's front leg was swelling quickly, its breathing labored. "Damn it," Ethan muttered. The trees were quiet, too quiet. But he wasn't alone. From the shadowed edge of the clearing, a figure watched. Tala crouched behind a curtain of ferns, eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. She had been trailing Ethan for more than an hour, unseen, unheard. She'd seen the signs, his uneven saddle marks in the soil, the careless rhythm of his horse's gait. He was hurt. He was alone. He was vulnerable. She should have walked away. Trusting strangers in the wilderness was a fool's game. She'd learned that the day her village burned, the screams, the gunshots, the smoke rising in the cold dawn sky, Tala had survived by running, hiding, and never looking back. But something about the way Ethan tried to calm his horse, even while clearly in pain, caught her. A flicker of memory stirred. Her brother's voice, long gone, "Help when you can. It's the way of our people." Tala stepped out of the trees. Ethan saw movement from the corner of his eye and jerked his hand toward the rifle, still strapped to his pack. But the pain held him back. He looked up sharply. What he saw made him freeze. A woman. She moved like a shadow, deliberate, quiet. Her long dark hair was braided, her clothes rough and worn but layered with care. There was a small pouch tied at her hip, and a hunting knife glinted in her right hand, not raised, not threatening, but present. She raised her other hand, palm outward. "I can help," she said. Her voice was low and steady, not soft, not uncertain. Ethan hesitated. He was hurt. His horse was worse. The rifle was too far to grab in time. And there was something in her eyes, not kindness exactly, but clarity, focus. He nodded once. Tala moved closer, crouching beside him. She examined his ankle with gentle hands, her touch efficient, professional. Ethan watched her face, stone still, serious. "Sprained," she said after a moment. "You need rest, cold water, maybe willow bark for the swelling." Ethan grunted. "I'll settle for the rest part." She said nothing, then moved toward the horse. The animal was still breathing hard, its leg visibly swollen. Tala ran her hands down its flank, whispering something under her breath in Lakota. Then she stepped back. "He won't make it far," she said quietly. Ethan closed his eyes. The horse had carried him through the worst terrain, had been his only constant since leaving everything behind. Now, he had to let it go. Slowly, painfully, he undid the saddle straps and bridle. The horse stood still as Ethan pressed his hand to its neck one last time. Then he stepped back. The animal limped away into the trees, vanishing between the trunks like smoke. "You did the right thing," Tala said. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he grabbed a long branch, tested its weight, and leaned on it like a crutch. "Looks like I'll be walking from here." Tala studied him. "Not alone." Ethan blinked. "You're coming with me?" "For a while," she replied. "You won't get far on that leg. And this forest isn't as empty as it looks." Something in her voice told him she knew that from experience. Ethan nodded slowly. "Name's Ethan." She didn't offer hers immediately. Instead, she turned toward the west. "We should move. There's a stream nearby." They walked in silence, her steps light, his labored, but somehow the space between them didn't feel hostile, just cautious, measured. He glanced sideways at her as they walked, trying to make sense of her. She didn't flinch at noise. She moved like she belonged to the land, and yet something about her posture said she didn't feel safe anywhere. Finally, he asked, "You always live out here?" Tala didn't look at him. "I grew up here." There was pain wrapped in those words, heavy, quiet pain. Ethan didn't press. They moved on, the shadows of the trees lengthening around them. Two strangers, wounded by different wars, walking the same path for now. The stream Tala had mentioned wasn't far, maybe half a mile west, where the trees thinned and the land dipped gently into a quiet hollow. The sun was beginning to set, casting long golden beams through the trunks. Birds flitted overhead, and a fox darted across their path, disappearing into the ferns without a sound. The forest here was alive, breathing, a stark contrast to the silence Ethan had grown used to since the war. Tala walked ahead, her steps light, always listening. Ethan followed behind her, leaning on the makeshift crutch. Each step sent a dull ache through his ankle, but he said nothing. He didn't want to look weak, not in front of her, not again. She knelt beside the stream first, dipping her hands into the clear water. Ethan lowered himself to the ground with effort and cupped a drink for himself. The water was cold and clean, rushing over rocks smoothed by time. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan glanced over. "You always travel alone?" Tala didn't look at him. She stared into the water, her reflection fractured by the current. "Yes." "That by choice?" A pause, then by necessity. Ethan didn't ask more. He knew what it meant to lose people. He could read it in her voice. That quiet edge. The kind of silence that came after screaming didn't help anymore. They sat by the stream for a while, letting their muscles rest. The firelight would have to wait. For now, the cool air and sound of the stream offered all the comfort they could ask for. Later, they found a small clearing near a grove of old pine trees. Tala built a fire without a word, gathering dry branches and tinder with practiced speed. Ethan watched her from a nearby rock, admiring the ease with which she moved. Efficient, focused. Like she had done this 100 times before. "Not your first time out here," he said as she struck the flint. "No." "You live out here? I survive out here." There was no bitterness in her tone, just fact. Like someone who had stopped hoping the world would ever be kind again. Ethan nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. The fire caught and warm light flickered over their faces. He pulled a bit of bread from his pack and offered her half. She hesitated, then took it. They ate in silence. The crickets began their nightly song. A breeze moved gently through the trees. The fire cracked softly, the smell of smoke mixing with pine needles and damp earth. "You don't talk much," Ethan said eventually. Tala looked at him, a faint glint of amusement in her eyes. "Neither do you." He chuckled, surprised by how natural it felt. "Fair enough." After a pause, he said, "I was in the war, fought 4 years, came home to nothing." She nodded but didn't respond. "And you?" he asked gently. Tala's gaze shifted toward the flames. Her hands, which had been calm all evening, tightened slightly around her knees. "I had a village," she said finally, "a family. We weren't at war, not at first, but war came to us anyway." Ethan waited. They called it a raid, said it was justified, that we were harboring fighters. Her voice didn't rise, but her eyes darkened. "I was 16. I ran into the woods. I kept running." Ethan swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." Tala didn't reply, but she didn't walk away either. They sat there for a long time, two people bound by sorrow neither of them had chosen. The fire burned low, casting long shadows. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl hooted. "You ever think about going back?" Ethan asked. She shook her head. "There's nothing left to go back to." Ethan looked down at the fire. "Same for me." Something shifted then. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a shared understanding. Like two travelers meeting at a crossroads neither of them expected. Not friends. Not yet. But no longer strangers. As the fire died down, Tala lay on her side near the edge of the firelight, her back to him. Ethan leaned against a log, stretching his bad leg carefully. The stars blinked to life above them. He didn't sleep quickly. His mind wandered through memories, the screams of battle, the face of his brother lying still in the mud, the way his mother used to sing while she cooked. And then, oddly, the sound of Tala's voice, low and steady. She didn't speak much, but when she did, it mattered. He glanced toward her in the dim firelight. She was still, her breathing slow and even. And for the first time in what felt like years, Ethan didn't feel completely alone. By the third day, Ethan's limp had grown less severe. He still leaned on the makeshift crutch, but his steps were firmer, more confident. Tala noticed, though she didn't comment. She simply adjusted her pace to match his, as she always had, quietly, without question. The forest around them had changed. It was wilder here, thicker brush, ancient trees with twisted roots, and a stillness that felt more watchful than peaceful. Even the bird song had faded, replaced by the occasional rustle in the underbrush or a soft crack of a twig underfoot. "We're close to water," Tala said, her voice low. Ethan glanced at her. "Another stream? A big one? Maybe a river?" He nodded. His canteen was nearly empty, and they hadn't eaten anything fresh in over a day. The thought of cold running water was more than welcome. They descended into a narrow ravine, shadows deepening with every step. As they neared the bottom, Ethan heard it, the sound of rushing water, steady and strong. Relief washed over him, but something felt off. Tala stopped suddenly, one hand raised. Ethan froze. She turned her head, listening. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no wind, just the river. Then, from behind a clump of bushes, came a low, rumbling growl. A massive black bear emerged, its shoulders hunched, its dark eyes locked onto them. It was close, too close. The bear rose up on its hind legs, towering, mouth slightly open, teeth gleaming. "Don't move," Tala said sharply, her voice just above a whisper. "Don't run. It'll chase." Ethan's heart pounded. He shifted his weight carefully, one hand reaching toward his rifle. "What do we do? Or we make it think we're not worth the fight." The bear dropped back down and began to inch forward, its paws thudding softly against the earth. Ethan could see its muscles ripple with each step. It wasn't starving, but it was angry, defensive. Tala took a slow step forward, holding out her arms slightly, palms open. "Stay behind me." "What? Do it." Ethan obeyed. Tala's voice changed then. She began to speak, not to him, but to the bear, a low, rhythmic chant in Lakota, her voice calm, steady, almost melodic. The bear paused. It tilted its head, confused by the sound. But then, the wind shifted. The bear caught their scent. It let out a sharp, thunderous roar and charged. "Now!" Tala shouted. Ethan fired his rifle into the air. The shot cracked like lightning through the ravine. The bear flinched, stumbled, but didn't stop. Tala darted to the side, grabbing a thick branch from the ground. "Hey, over here!" she yelled, waving the wood, drawing its attention. The bear turned, swiping its paw through the air where she had just stood. Ethan dropped to one knee, took aim, his ankle flaring with pain, and fired again. The bullet grazed the bear's shoulder. It roared in pain, staggering backward, but still it didn't run. "Come on!" Tala shouted, throwing a rock at its feet. "Go!" Another growl. The bear hesitated, its ears flattening. It glanced from Tala to Ethan, then finally, slowly, it turned and lumbered away into the trees, leaving deep prints in the soft earth behind it. Silence returned. Ethan exhaled hard, lowering the rifle. Tala dropped the branch and stood completely still, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "You all right?" he asked, breathless. She nodded, her voice tight. "You?" "Still breathing," he said with a strained smile. They stood like that for a long moment, two survivors beneath a sky darkened by the canopy, surrounded by trembling leaves and the fading scent of fear. "That was insane," Ethan finally said. "That was necessary." He chuckled despite himself. "You're something else, you know that?" Tala turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Out here, you don't wait for someone to save you. You act, or you die." Ethan studied her, then nodded slowly. Still, thanks. You could have run, so could you. She walked past him toward the riverbank. He followed, slower, dragging his injured leg. They sat in the cool shade beside the water, letting the silence settle again. After a few minutes, Ethan looked over. You weren't scared, were you? Tala didn't answer right away. She was staring at the water, her fingers absently tracing the edge of a smooth stone. I've seen worse, she said, but yes, I was scared. He appreciated her honesty. It felt like another step across the invisible bridge they'd been building between them. You ever think maybe we're not just surviving anymore? He asked. She glanced at him, curious. Maybe, he said slowly, we're starting to live. Tala looked back at the river. Her lips twitched, just barely, into something that might have been a smile. Maybe. And for a little while they just sat, two souls bruised by the world, slowly learning how to breathe again. Together, the town appeared like a mirage, faint outlines at first, then shapes, movement, smoke from chimneys. It wasn't on any map Ethan had seen, but out here, settlements often bloomed in the wilderness like wildflowers, unexpected, stubborn and fragile. Tala stopped just short of the ridge. We don't have to go in, she said, her tone flat. Ethan glanced at her, surprised. You think it's dangerous? She shook her head. I just don't like the way people look at me in places like that. Ethan hesitated. I can go alone. Get what we need. You stay back. No, she said simply. I'm not hiding. And so they went together. The town was no more than a cluster of wooden buildings, some homes, a general store, a tavern, and a barn. People moved cautiously, eyes narrowed, conversations low. They were survivors, too. Everyone out here was. Ethan led the way to the store, his limp slightly improved, Tala walking beside him with her cloak pulled tighter over her shoulders. The shopkeeper was a woman in her 50s, suspicious at first, but softened once Ethan laid down a few silver coins and asked politely for salt, coffee, and bandages. They were nearly finished when the door creaked open behind them. Footsteps, slow, heavy. Ethan turned, and the air left his lungs. The man was broad-shouldered, with a thick beard and a long scar across his cheek. He wore the remnants of a Union coat, the blue faded almost to gray. His eyes were sharp, cold, familiar. Cole, the man said, voice low and uncertain. Ethan's jaw tightened. Walker. The store went quiet. Tala watched Ethan's posture shift, the way his shoulders tensed, how his right hand drifted instinctively toward where his rifle would have been, had it not been outside with the horses. You're still breathing, Walker muttered. Didn't think you would be, after Cold Harbor. You and me both, Ethan said flatly. They stood like that, two ghosts of the same war, staring at each other across sacks of flour and barrels of nails. Tala didn't move, but she watched them both closely. Walker took a step forward. You left me behind. You ordered us to charge a position with no cover, Ethan replied. We lost 20 men in 10 minutes. I pulled who I could. You were gone. You're lying. I carried Mitchell's body 2 miles, Ethan snapped. You think I didn't come back for you? There was no coming back. Walker's face reddened. His hand twitched toward the pistol at his belt. Tala stepped slightly in front of Ethan. Not here, she said, calm but firm. Not now. Walker's eyes narrowed at her. Who's this, your squaw? Ethan moved fast, faster than Tala had ever seen him. He crossed the room in 2 steps and slammed Walker into the wall. One hand clenched around the man's coat, the other curled into a fist. Don't ever call her that again. The storekeeper shrieked, something clattered to the floor. Walker didn't resist, he just looked into Ethan's eyes and smiled. There he is, the soldier. Ethan's fist hovered, trembling in the air, but it didn't fall. He stepped back instead, breathing hard, eyes wide. Walker straightened his coat and spat on the floor. You'll always be one of us, Cole, doesn't matter how far you run. He left, slamming the door behind him. Tala stood very still. The storekeeper pretended to rearrange shelves. Ethan leaned against the counter, silent. His breathing was ragged, his hand shaking. Outside, the sky had begun to darken again. They rode out of town in silence. Not until the trees swallowed the last rooftops did Tala speak. You were going to hit him. Ethan didn't answer. You wanted to, she added. He exhaled. Yeah. And? I wanted to kill him, he said quietly. Right there. I saw him standing there, talking like that, dragging up everything I've tried to bury, and I wanted him gone. Tala nodded once. So why didn't you? Ethan looked at her. Because you were there. That made her stop. He continued, if you hadn't said something, I don't know what would have happened. Maybe I'd be the one they're burying tomorrow. Tala looked ahead again, her voice softer now. I've seen what revenge does to people. It doesn't take the pain away, or it just buries it deeper. Ethan stared at the trail, thinking. He was right about one thing, he said eventually. I'm still a soldier. I've never stopped fighting. Maybe, Tala said. You just haven't found what's worth protecting yet. They rode on, the shadows lengthening through the forest. The trees whispered around them, wind rustling high above. That night, as they made camp beside a narrow creek, Ethan didn't speak much, but he sat closer to the fire than usual. Tala handed him a strip of smoked meat. He took it without a word, nodding once. Later, when he thought she'd fallen asleep, he looked over at her. I didn't walk away because I'm a coward, he whispered. Tala's eyes opened. I know. And for the first time in years, Ethan closed his eyes. Not from exhaustion, but because he felt safe enough to. The fire was small, but it gave off just enough warmth to keep the chill away. They had stopped beside a slow-moving river, its surface reflecting the moonlight in silver ribbons. The air was quiet, filled only with the crackling of wood and the occasional call of a night bird far off in the trees. Tala crouched near the flames, sharpening her knife with calm, steady strokes. Sparks popped and danced into the darkness. Ethan sat across from her, leaning back against a fallen log, his injured legs stretched out and wrapped in clean bandages. He rolled a twig between his fingers, watching her in silence. She hadn't said much since the encounter in town, neither had he, but the quiet between them felt different now, less like avoidance, more like understanding. You've been quiet today, Ethan finally said, his voice low and even. Tala glanced up, her eyes catching the firelight, then returned her focus to the blade. So have you. He offered a crooked smile. Guess I'm still thinking about what happened. She didn't answer, but he could tell she was listening. He sighed, tossing the twig into the fire. When I saw Walker, it was like I was back there again, back in that mud, in the smoke, with men screaming all around me. I could hear it, smell it. His voice faltered, but he pushed on, and then I heard him call you that word. He shook his head. I wasn't going to let him take another thing from me. Tala looked up at him, her eyes steady. You didn't. He searched her expression. I've lost a lot of people, some to war, some just drifted away. I've carried the weight of their faces for years, and sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be free of it. You won't, she said gently, but you'll learn to carry it differently. Ethan stared into the fire. You speak like someone who knows. Tala hesitated. Then she set the knife aside and leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees. When I was a girl, she began, her voice barely more than a whisper, my mother used to braid my hair in the mornings. She'd sing while she did it, old songs from before the settlers came. Ethan didn't move. One morning the singing stopped, she continued. There was shouting outside, horses, gunfire, smoke. I ran into the woods barefoot. I didn't stop running until the trees swallowed everything behind me. Her hands were still now, resting on her knees. Her voice didn't crack. It was calm, so calm it hurt. I went back days later, she said. What was left, I buried with my hands. Silence hung heavy between them. Ethan swallowed hard. You were just a child. Tala nodded slowly. So were many of the ones they burned. He felt the fire's heat on his face, but it couldn't touch the cold settling in his chest. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. Tala looked at him, not with anger or pity, but something deeper. You didn't light the fires, Ethan. He nodded, but the guilt didn't ease. No. But I wore the uniform of the men who did. A long pause followed. Then Tala spoke, softer now. You can't undo the past, but you can decide who you'll stand with now. Ethan met her gaze. I want to stand with you, he said. It came out quieter than he intended, but it hung in the air like a vow. Tala didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. Instead, she reached into her pack and pulled out a small leather pouch. From it, she drew a dried root and broke off a piece, placing it into the pot of water warming by the fire. What's that? Ethan asked. Willow bark. Helps with pain. I used it on my grandfather's joints. He used to say it could ease a heavy soul, too. She gave him a small smile. We'll see if he was right. He chuckled, surprised by the warmth rising in his chest. As the tea steeped, Tala lay back on her blanket, arms folded beneath her head. She stared up at the stars, their faint light filtered through the trees above. You believe in signs? She asked suddenly. Ethan blinked. Signs? Things the world shows us when we need them. I don't know. Maybe I stopped looking. She turned her head slightly toward him. Then maybe it's time to start again. They shared the willow tea in silence, passing the cup between them. It was bitter, earthy, but oddly comforting. The fire burned lower, throwing soft orange light across their faces. You never told me what you're looking for, Tala said quietly. Ethan leaned back, staring into the canopy. I'm not sure. Peace, maybe. Redemption, if that's still a thing. It is, she said. But it doesn't come easy. He smiled faintly. Nothing worth keeping ever does. She closed her eyes, and for the first time, Ethan saw her not as the survivor, not as the healer, but as a woman, human and hurting, trying to build something new from ashes. He didn't say it aloud, but the thought settled quietly in his chest. Maybe peace isn't a place you find. Maybe it's a person you walk beside. The sun had just cleared the horizon when they heard the crying. Not a wild animal, not the howl of the wind. This was human. A woman's voice, cracking and hoarse, echoing faintly between the trees. Ethan and Tala froze. Then, without a word, they both moved. Tala leading the way, Ethan close behind, his limp barely slowing him. The sound grew louder, more desperate, until they found her. A woman sat slumped against a fallen tree, her hands wrapped tightly around her swollen belly. Her dress was torn, stained with mud and blood, her hair tangled, eyes wild with fear and exhaustion. Beside her, a boy, no older than 6, clung to her skirt, his cheeks streaked with dirt and tears. Tala dropped to her knees instantly. Easy, she said softly, her voice shifting to something gentle, something maternal. You're safe now. The woman looked up, blinking in disbelief. Please, she whispered. My husband, he went looking for food. Hasn't come back. It's been 2 nights. Her breath hitched. The baby's coming. Ethan's pulse quickened. He looked at Tala. Can we move her? Tala shook her head. Not in her state. We need shelter. And quickly. They worked fast. Ethan found a patch of dry ground under a rock overhang nearby and cleared space for a fire. Tala helped the woman, Sarah she said her name was, onto a bed of pine needles and blankets from her own pack. The boy, Jacob, refused to leave his mother's side, so Ethan sat with him, keeping him calm while Tala boiled water and prepared her supplies. You've done this before? Ethan asked under his breath. Tala didn't look up, more times than I can count. Her hands moved with practiced grace, grinding herbs, tearing cloth into strips, preparing the fire for warmth and sterilization. Ethan watched her in awe. Out here, without tools or help, she moved like someone who had become the wilderness, who knew its rules, its dangers, and how to bend them without breaking. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. The forest held its breath. Then the cries came, not of pain, but of new life. A baby's first wail split the air, followed by Sarah's sobs. Relief, exhaustion, joy. Tala emerged from the shelter, her arms cradling a small, red-faced bundle wrapped in her shawl. Ethan stood. Tala walked over slowly, then gently placed the child into Sarah's arms. A girl, she said with a faint smile, strong. Sarah wept openly, clutching the baby to her chest. Jacob crawled closer, touching his sister's tiny fingers. Ethan blinked hard, something tightened in his throat. It had been so long since he'd seen anything like this. New life, a beginning. Proof that something good could still happen in this world. He turned away, letting Tala have her moment with the mother and children. Later that evening, while Sarah and the baby slept, Ethan went to fetch water from the stream. On the way back, he heard something, cracking branches, labored breath. Then he saw him, a man, staggering through the woods, clutching his side, his shirt soaked with blood. Help, the man gasped, collapsing into Ethan's arms. Ethan eased him down and called out, Tala! Within minutes, they had the man, Tom, Sarah's husband, laid beside the fire. His side was torn open from a boar's tusk, the wound deep but not fatal. Tala worked quickly, cleaning and stitching, whispering in Lakota as her hands moved. Ethan helped however he could, holding the man steady, boiling water, keeping the fire hot. It took hours, but when it was done, Tom slept. The family was whole again. That night, the fire burned brighter than usual. Ethan and Tala sat nearby, their shoulders nearly touching. The boy, Jacob, had crawled into Ethan's lap without asking, already asleep. The baby lay curled against her mother's chest, and Tom rested with his hand gently over Sarah's. They wouldn't have made it, Ethan said quietly. Not without you. Tala shook her head. Not without us. He looked at her then, really looked. You saved them, he said. So did you. They were quiet for a long while watching the fire. Crickets sang in the distance. An owl called once, then again. The night felt softer, safer. You ever think about settling somewhere? Ethan asked. Building something again? Tala was silent. Then she said, I did once, long ago, and now, I don't know, but maybe, Ethan smiled faintly. Maybe's a start. She turned to him. And you? He looked down at Jacob, the boy's hand still gripping the fabric of Ethan's coat in sleep. I think I forgot what hope looked like, he said. Today, I remembered. The fire crackled. Tala leaned her head gently against his shoulder. He didn't move away. And for that one night, in a forest still scarred by all the world had taken from them, something new was born. Not just a child, but the first fragile shape of a future. The moon hung low, swollen and pale above the trees. The forest was unusually still, too still. Tala felt it first, a ripple in the air like a shadow holding its breath. She sat upright beside the fire, eyes narrowing toward the darkness beyond the clearing. Her hand moved slowly to her knife. Ethan stirred. What is it? She didn't answer. Then it came. The sound of dry leaves crunching beneath boots. 3 shadows emerged from the tree line, rifles drawn, teeth grinning in the dark. Well, well, one of them sneered. Looks like we found something worth our trouble. Tala rose slowly. Ethan followed, his legs still stiff but his hand already gripping his rifle. Behind them, Sarah gasped, clutching her baby. Tom tried to rise, groaning in pain, still too weak to stand. Jacob whimpered beside his mother, eyes wide with fear. The bandits stepped into the firelight. Same men, same scarred faces. Their leader, the one with the crooked nose and long coat, grinned like he'd been waiting for this moment. You two really should have stayed out of our way. Ethan leveled his rifle. You should have learned how to pick your fights. The man chuckled. Big talk for someone limping. The tension snapped. The bandits charged. Gunfire cracked through the trees. Ethan fired first, dropping to one knee behind a log and forcing one attacker to duck. Tala moved like wind, silent and deadly, slashing low at the knees of the man closest to her before spinning away into the shadows. But there were too many. One of the bandits circled around the fire and lunged at Ethan, knocking the rifle from his hands. They grappled, fists flying, the sounds of breath and struggle filling the clearing. Tala fought her way back toward him, knife flashing in the firelight, but the leader intercepted her, swinging the butt of his rifle hard. She ducked. Almost. The blow clipped her shoulder, sending her stumbling. Her knife clattered to the ground. Ethan saw it happen, saw the bandit raise his knife, aiming for Tala. And then he moved, without thought, without hesitation. He threw himself forward, placing his body between the blade and the woman he had come to trust. The knife found its mark, deep, just under his ribs. Tala screamed his name. The forest seemed to explode. Rage, gunfire, firelight, all a blur. But Tala didn't hesitate. She dove for her fallen blade, twisted low, and drove it into the side of the man who had stabbed Ethan. He gasped, stumbled, and fell. The remaining bandits, seeing their leader bleeding and their advantage lost, backed away into the dark, muttering curses as they vanished into the trees. Silence fell again. Only the crackling of the fire remained, and Ethan's ragged breathing. Tala dropped beside him, hands already soaked in blood. No, she whispered, pressing a cloth to the wound. No, 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 don't you dare. Ethan coughed, wincing. I'm all right. You're not, she snapped, her voice trembling. You're bleeding too much. He managed a weak smile. You're bossy when you're scared. She ignored him, tearing strips of fabric from her own cloak, working with trembling fingers to slow the bleeding. You shouldn't have done that. You'd have done the same. That's not the point. Tears welled in her eyes, and she cursed under her breath in Lakota, the language wrapping around her like armor and prayer. You idiot, she said, softer this time. You stubborn, reckless, beautiful idiot. Ethan's eyelids fluttered. You think I'm beautiful? Shut up. She pressed harder against the wound. Stay with me. You hear me? His hand reached for hers, weak, bloody, but warm. I'm not going anywhere. And she believed him. She worked through the night, cleaning, binding, whispering the old words her grandmother taught her, the ones meant to carry strength into the soul and pain out of it. Her voice never wavered. Not once. When morning came, the forest was bathed in pale gold. Birds sang again, and Ethan stirred. Tala's head had slumped beside him, her hand still wrapped in his. As he opened his eyes, she woke instantly, eyes snapping up. You're alive, she breathed, more a statement than a question. Disappointed? He rasped. She laughed, relief flooding her features. You're impossible. He squeezed her hand. But I'm yours if you'll have me. Tala froze, then nodded. Just once, I already do. In the distance, Sarah rocked her baby beneath the trees, humming a lullaby. Tom limped to the fire, nodding silently at the man who had saved his family. The bandits were gone, or the blood would fade. But the moment this choice was carved into the forest forever, Ethan hadn't fallen by accident, he had stepped into the blade, and somehow that made all the difference. Ethan drifted, not through sleep, through something deeper. He wasn't cold, he wasn't in pain, he was just floating. There was no sky, no ground, only light, soft and golden like morning sun through an old window. The kind his mother used to open when the house still smelled of biscuits and wildflowers. He saw her now, his mother, standing in the kitchen of the old homestead, her back turned, humming the same lullaby she used to sing to his sister. The walls were whole, the floor didn't creak. Everything was before. "Ma?" he called out, voice smaller than he remembered it ever being. She turned, smiled at him, but said nothing. Then she faded, and another figure took her place. His brother Daniel, 17 forever, rifle slung across his shoulder, the blood still fresh on his chest. "Missed you," Ethan whispered. Daniel didn't answer, just looked at him, with eyes full of something Ethan couldn't name. Pride? Forgiveness? Maybe both. But he too vanished, and then Ethan stood alone in a wide prairie, the grass swaying knee-high beneath a sky too wide to comprehend. A hawk cried above, circling. He looked down at his hands. No scars, no blood, he was whole. A voice echoed across the field. "You can stay here. It was neither kind nor cruel, just true. You've earned your rest." Ethan closed his eyes. It would be so easy, so quiet, so final. But then, another voice, not an echo, not memory. Her. Ethan. It was quiet, urgent, real. "Come back." He turned toward the sound. In the distance, a fire flickered, a shape beside it, small, still. "Please, Tala." Not her voice in his memory. Her, calling him back. He stepped forward into the wind. The grass parted like water, the air thickened, and for a moment, everything shook, like the world itself was deciding whether to let him go. He took another step, then another, and the light began to fade. He gasped awake. Air hit his lungs like thunder. His eyes flew open and all he saw was sky, real sky, framed by tall trees and dancing smoke. Then her face appeared above him. Tala, tired, pale, but her eyes were fire. "Ethan," she breathed, brushing the sweat from his forehead. He tried to speak, but only managed a weak groan. Tala exhaled a breath she'd been holding for hours. "Maybe days. You came back." He blinked slowly, was thinking about staying gone. Her brows drew together. "You idiot." He managed a faint smile. "But you called me." Her lips parted, surprised. "You heard me?" He nodded, just slightly. "Felt you." She looked away quickly, but not fast enough to hide the tears. She wiped them with the back of her hand like she was brushing off dirt. "I wasn't going to let you die," she said quietly. "I know," he whispered. "That's why I didn't." Tala leaned down, pressing her forehead lightly against his. Her hair fell over both of them like a curtain, and for a long moment there was only breath, only warmth, only the truth they hadn't said out loud yet, but now understood. Behind them, the forest slowly returned to life. Birds chirped, water flowed. Somewhere a deer stepped lightly through underbrush. But here, beside a fading fire and a man who had touched the edge of the other world, time stood still. When Ethan fell asleep again, it was peaceful, and for the first time in a very long while it wasn't running away from anything. Ethan awoke to birdsong, not the kind that signaled danger. No, this was different, soft, melodic, threaded through with early morning light. The forest breathed around him, gentle and alive. He blinked up at the canopy, then turned his head slowly. Tala sat nearby, her back to him. She was sharpening her knife again, the rhythmic scrape steady and even. She didn't look over. "How long was I out?" Ethan rasped, his voice rough but stronger. She didn't flinch. 2 days. He shifted, wincing at the dull throb in his side. "Feels like 2 years. Could have been forever," she said. He studied her. There was something different in her voice. Not distance, not coldness, but something guarded. "Thanks for keeping me alive," he said softly. She nodded once, still not turning around. There was silence for a while, the kind that stretched too long. Finally, Ethan broke it. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. Tala stopped sharpening. Her shoulders stiffened. "I should," she said quietly. Why? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she rose and walked to the edge of the clearing, staring out past the trees as if something beyond them held an answer she didn't want to hear. I've seen what happens when I stay, she said at last. People die. People get hurt. Everything I care about disappears. Ethan struggled upright, the effort sending a wave of pain through his side. He gritted his teeth, planting one hand on the ground to steady himself. That's not true. She turned to him, eyes burning. It is. My family, my village, everyone. I'm the one who lived. I'm the one who runs. Then maybe it's time you stopped running. She laughed, bitter and small. And do what? Build a new life on top of the ashes? Why not? Because ashes don't grow roots. Ethan looked at her, really looked. Tala, the healer, the warrior, the ghost walker between two worlds. She had faced every threat the wilderness could throw at her and stood tall. But this was fear of the heart, fear of hope. He reached out his hand, palm open. Then plant something with me. She stared at him, unmoving. I don't know what's ahead, he said. I can't promise it'll be safe or easy, but I know I'd rather limp into tomorrow with you than walk strong into it alone. Her eyes flicked to his hand. I don't need saving, Ethan. I know, he said gently, but maybe I do. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something had changed. Less weight in her shoulders, less fight in her jaw. She crossed the space between them slowly, then knelt beside him, took his hand, held it. I'll stay, she whispered. For now. He smiled, his eyes closing in relief. That's all I ask. The days that followed were quiet, healing days. Ethan grew stronger. Tala hunted, foraged, and sang while she worked. Soft melodies in Lakota that reminded him of wind through pine needles and river stones warmed by sun. He asked her what the words meant. She said they're prayers, not for gods, for balance. Each night they lit a fire. Each morning they woke side by side. It wasn't a romance born of desperation. It was something deeper. Two people learning how to belong again. One morning, Ethan stood fully for the first time without the crutch. Tala didn't say anything, but her smile, small and quiet, spoke louder than words. He walked to the edge of the clearing, hands on his hips, looking out at the forest, the sky, the world. Then he turned to her. We don't have to keep moving, he said. Not yet. She tilted her head. What are you thinking? Shelter, tools, a place. A place? A home. Tala looked away, lips pressed tight. Not forever, Ethan added, but long enough to grow something. She met his gaze. And if the world comes for us again? Ethan stepped closer, brushing a lock of hair from her brow. Then we face it together. She held his hand against her cheek for a moment, then nodded. All right, she said. Let's build something. The first wall went up with more creaks than confidence. Ethan stood back, hands on his hips, studying the crooked frame of pine logs they'd bound together with rope and patience. It wasn't much, just a skeleton of a shelter, but it stood. That's something, he muttered. Tala smirked from across the clearing. Leans like a drunk mule. Still standing, Ethan replied. Like me, they laughed, quiet but real. By the end of the week, there was a roof. A fire pit lined with stone. A small raised cot made from woven branches and thick moss. Tala planted herbs along the riverbank, yarrow, mint, sweetgrass. Ethan fashioned snares and a fishing spear from ashwood. They worked together, barely needing words. In the mornings, they gathered berries while the mist still clung to the trees. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, sharing food, stories, and silence, the kind of silence that didn't feel empty anymore. One night, Ethan asked, what would you have done if we hadn't met? Tala stared into the flames, kept moving, she said, surviving. One day at a time. He nodded. And now? Now. I think I'd like to stay. He looked over at her. For good? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned her head on his shoulder. Until the land tells me otherwise. That was enough. By the time summer reached its height, their small homestead had become something more. Tom and Sarah returned once, with both children. The baby had grown strong and Jacob ran wild through the trees. They brought seed, cloth, a bundle of letters from nearby settlers looking for a healer. Tala agreed to see them, but only here, in the forest. I won't go back to the world, she told Ethan, but I'll let pieces of it come to me. Ethan understood. He helped build benches beneath the big oak near the stream. Sometimes people came and sat in silence, waiting their turn. Tala saw them one by one, setting broken bones, mixing tinctures, asking questions no one else bothered to ask. Ethan became known as the quiet man by the fire, the one who could shoot a hawk from the sky if needed but preferred carving spoons and teaching children how to tie fishing lines. They never called themselves husband and wife, no ceremony, no church, no rings, just two souls who had walked through fire and chosen to stay. One autumn morning, Ethan rose early and walked down to the river. Mist clung low to the ground. The water ran slow and cold. He crouched, washed his face, then sat on the smooth, flat stone he always used as a seat. He pulled a small leather notebook from his pocket. Inside were pages filled with words, some messy, some careful. Memories, lessons, fragments of what they'd survived, what they'd built. He turned to a fresh page and began to write, "I left home looking for peace. I didn't find it in distance, or silence, or vengeance. I found it in her hands, her eyes, her voice when she said, 'Stay.' A man doesn't need to own the world to belong somewhere. Sometimes all it takes is a fire, a roof, and someone who knows when to sit beside you without asking why you're hurting. We were broken when we met, now we are rooted." He paused, then wrote one more line. "This place is no longer the edge of the wild. It is the beginning of something whole." That night, Tala found him watching the stars. She sat beside him, close, a blanket draped over both their shoulders. The fire burned low, casting a soft glow over the clearing. She pointed upward. "That one's Wiyaya," she said. "The wanderer. My grandmother said it watches those who walk alone." Ethan smiled. "Then it's probably confused." "Why?" "Because I'm not walking alone anymore." Tala looked at him for a long moment, then reached over and took his hand. "No," she said, "you're not. Some stories are born of war and loss, but others, quiet ones, steady ones, are born when two people decide not to run anymore." Ethan and Tala didn't find peace. They built it with ash and earth and healing hands. And maybe that's all any of us can do in the end. Plant something, protect it, and hope it grows. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in starting over. And don't forget to subscribe for more tales of courage, healing, and hope.